The phone rang at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, which was precisely when Gerald Pemberton Willis sat down to his shepherd's pie. Now, you might think this is a perfectly normal occurrence. Phones ring, people eat dinner, these things happen. But what you need to understand is that Gerald Pemberton Willis was not picking up that phone. Not for his mother, not for the Prime Minister, not for God himself if the Almighty had somehow acquired his unlisted number. 7 p.m. was sacred. 7 p.m. was shepherd's pie time, and shepherd's pie, as Gerald would tell anyone foolish enough to ask, did not wait for anyone. The phone kept ringing. Gerald's left eye twitched. His wife, Dorothy, looked up from her own plate with the expression of someone who had been married for 32 years and recognized the early warning signs of what she privately called the incident countdown. "Don't," she said simply. The phone rang again, and again, and again. What neither Gerald nor Dorothy knew as they sat in their modest kitchen in Basingstoke was that the entity on the other end of that phone call had travelled approximately 4,000 light-years to make it. They also didn't know that this entity, a mid-level diplomatic attaché named Vrelix Spindlemark the Tertiary, was currently sweating through 3 layers of ceremonial bureaucratic robes in a communications hub orbiting Neptune. Vrelix had precisely one job: make first contact with humanity, follow the protocols, announce the existence of the Galactic Consortium, invite Earth to join 17,000 civilizations in peaceful commerce and cultural exchange. Easy. He'd done this 47 times before. Piece of cake, or whatever the Terran equivalent of cake was. He'd looked it up. Apparently, it was also cake. These humans were straightforward. He liked that. What Vrelix had not done was read page 8412 of the Precursor Protocols, which was entirely understandable because who reads that far into anything? The Precursor Protocols were roughly the size of a small moon and written in a dialect so ancient that most of it had been translated through 17 different languages before landing in something approaching modern galactic standard. Most species got through the first 100 pages or so. Don't blow up inhabited planets, don't weaponize black holes, always say please and thank you, and called it a day. But page 8412 contained exactly one line about humanity, written by the Precursors themselves approximately 50,000 years ago, before they'd mysteriously vanished from the galaxy in what most historians assumed was either transcendence or an extremely successful group vacation. The line read, "Regarding species 4722, humans, never, under any circumstances, initiate contact during consumption periods. Consequences? Severe." Vrelix did not know this. Gerald Pemberton Willis picked up the phone. "What?" Vrelix blinked his 6 eyes in succession, a gesture that in his species indicated pleasant surprise and diplomatic readiness. He activated his translation matrix and began the speech he'd memorized. "Greetings, human. I am Vrelix Spindlemark the Tertiary, representing the Galactic Consortium of Sentient—" "I'm eating!" The line went dead. Vrelix stared at the communication panel, his ceremonial antennae drooping in confusion. Had the connection failed? Was there a technical malfunction? He'd specifically chosen this time, prime evening hours in the European sector, because his research indicated humans were most likely to be at their residences, available and receptive. He dialed again. Gerald picked up on the first ring this time. "Now you listen here. I apologize for any inconvenience. I merely wish to inform your species that you are not alone in the universe, and do I sound like I care about the bloody universe right now? I've got shepherd's pie going cold on my plate. What is a shepherd's pie? That's it!" Gerald slammed the phone down so hard that Vrelix's audio receptors rang for a full 30 seconds afterward. Dorothy sighed and took a bite of her dinner. "You're going to give yourself a heart attack." "Some alien calls me during dinner." "Dinner, Dorothy." "Yes, dear. The alien. Did you not hear me talking to it? I heard you shouting at the phone, which is what you do every Tuesday when someone calls during dinner. Last week it was the man about the car insurance. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. But this one said it was... The phone rang again. Something in Gerald's brain, some primal part that had evolved specifically to deal with persistent interruptions to the evening meal, snapped. He picked up the phone, and when he spoke, his voice had gone very, very quiet. This was, Dorothy knew, far more dangerous than the shouting. You have 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't report you to the police, the military, and every single one of those television programs that investigates nuisance calls. Vrelix, who had spent the last 3 minutes consulting with his supervisor's supervisor, and the Handbook of Crisis Management in First Contact Scenarios, made his second mistake of the evening. Sir, I'm calling from a diplomatic vessel currently positioned in your solar system's outer planets region. I am not subject to your planetary telecommunications regulations. There was a very long pause. You're actually serious, Gerald said slowly. You're actually a genuine extraterrestrial being. Yes, finally. Now if we could proceed with, and you still couldn't wait until after dinner? Click. This time, Vrelix didn't call back immediately. Instead, he sat very still in his communication pod, trying to understand what had just happened. He pulled up every piece of research his team had compiled on human psychology, human culture, human communication patterns. Nothing had indicated that dinner was a sacrosanct ritual that superseded first contact with alien life. His supervisor, a grizzled veteran named Thixorop, who had personally welcomed 63 species into the consortium, appeared on his communication screen. Having trouble, Spindlemark? They hung up on me 3 times. The human said he was eating. Thixorop's face went through several colors that Vrelix's species didn't even have names for. What time is it there? 1900 hours local time, prime contact window according to... Oh no, please tell me you didn't. Didn't what? I followed the protocols. I researched the optimal... Did you read the precursor protocols? All of them. Well, the main sections obviously, but page 8412. Look it up, now. Vrelix pulled up the file, scrolling through the dense text until he found the page. He read the line, then read it again, then read it a 3rd time, hoping desperately that the translation matrix was somehow malfunctioning. But it's just eating. Every species eats. It's humans, Thixorop said, his voice heavy with the weight of someone who clearly knew something terrible. It's always different with humans. There's a reason the Precursors left that warning. There's a reason it's the only species-specific protocol in the entire document. What reason? No one knows. The Precursors never explained, but every species that's ever tried to interrupt human meals has regretted it. Remember the Klaxer incident? Vrelix did not remember the Klaxer incident, primarily because it had been classified at a level so high that acknowledging its existence required 17 different security clearances. Should I wait and try again tomorrow? Perhaps at a different time? Thixorop's laugh was not a happy sound. Oh, you sweet, naive child. You've already called during dinner? The damage is done? This is going to go up the chain, way up the chain. I'd say it was nice working with you, but honestly, Spindlemark, I'm just glad I'm not in your position. The communication cut off. Vrelix sat alone in his pod, contemplating his life choices. He'd graduated top of his class at the Diplomatic Academy. He'd successfully negotiated trade agreements with species who communicated exclusively through interpretive dance. He'd once convinced a hive mind made entirely of sentient algae to join the consortium by writing them a strongly worded letter in spore patterns. And now his career was ending, because a human wanted to eat his shepherd's pie in peace. The next morning, Gerald woke up to find his back garden full of spacecraft. Not large ones, mind you. These were more like extremely advanced camper vans, all hovering about 2 feet off his lawn and absolutely ruining his petunias. Dorothy was already at the kitchen window, tea in hand, staring out with the resignation of someone whose Tuesday had officially become Wednesday in the worst possible way. "They're here for you," she said without looking at him. "What do they want?" "I imagine they want you to not report them to every government agency in existence for harassment." Gerald peered out the window. The ships, and there were at least a dozen of them now, had deployed what appeared to be apology banners. In English. In very large English. "We are deeply sorry for the interruption. We did not mean to disturb your meal. Please accept our sincere regrets." And somewhat more desperately, "Please don't be mad." "They flew across the galaxy," Gerald said slowly, "to apologize for a phone call. Apparently." A knock came at the door. Not from the front door, from the back door, the one that opened onto the garden where the ships were hovering. Gerald, still in his dressing gown and slippers, shuffled over and opened it. Relic stood there, looking significantly worse than he had the previous evening. His ceremonial robes were rumpled, his antennae drooped. He held what appeared to be a potted plant, though it was moving slightly and emitting a faint humming sound. "Mr. Pemberton Willis, I am so sorry." Gerald stared at him, at the ships, at the banners, at the plant thing that was definitely singing now, in a language that sounded like a piccolo having an argument with a tuba. "You interrupted my shepherd's pie," Gerald said flatly. "I know!" Vrelix looked like he might cry, if his species could cry, which they couldn't, but he managed to convey the emotional equivalent through sheer force of antennae drooping. "I didn't read the protocols. I thought humans were reasonable. I thought dinner was just, food. Just food." Gerald's voice had gone quiet again. Dorothy, from the kitchen, called out a warning. "Gerald! Just food?" Several of the hovering ships began backing away slightly. Vrelix realized his mistake instantly. No, I didn't mean, I meant, what I'm trying to say is that I understand now that dinner is not just food. It is clearly a sacred ritual of great importance, and I have violated that ritual, and I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences. What's the plant for? It's a harmonious forgiveness shrub. It's customary in my culture to... Does it stop singing? Ah, no. It sings whenever it detects emotional distress. It's supposed to be soothing, and sounds like a cat being murdered by a clarinet. The plant, as if offended, increased its volume. Dorothy appeared at Gerald's shoulder. "Let them in for tea, dear. You've made your point. But they made a mistake, flew across the galaxy to apologize, brought you a terrible singing plant, and it's getting cold out there." She looked at Vrelix. "You do drink tea, don't you?" I have 17 stomachs designed to process mineral suspensions, but I'm willing to try anything at this point." 20 minutes later, Gerald's kitchen table hosted the most unlikely diplomatic summit in human history. Vrelix sat awkwardly on a chair designed for a completely different anatomy, sipping tea that his translation matrix helpfully informed him was probably not lethal. 3 of his assistants stood by the door, taking notes. Dorothy had put out biscuits. "So," Gerald said, dunking a digestive with practiced precision, "you're saying that your entire galactic consortium has been aware of Earth for how long?" "Approximately 12,000 years. And you're just now making contact?" "Well, yes. You see, there are protocols. Species must reach a certain level of technological development. You must demonstrate the capacity for interstellar communication, nuclear fusion, basic artificial intelligence. We've had those things for decades." "Yes, but there were concerns." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "What sort of concerns?" Vrelix looked uncomfortable, which was impressive given that his face didn't actually move in ways humans would recognize as expressions. The Precursors left very specific warnings about humanity, beyond the dinner prohibition. Notes about excessive creativity in destructive applications, and alarming tendency towards spite-based problem-solving, and, most worryingly, will absolutely start fights they cannot possibly win just to see what happens. That's fair, Gerald admitted. We did have that whole Cold War business. Yes, we watched that with great interest. And terror. Mostly terror. The part where you pointed enough nuclear weapons at yourselves to crack the planet open like an egg and then just lived like that for decades? That raised questions. What kind of questions? Mainly, are they suicidal? And are they insane? And should we just wait and see if they blow themselves up before we waste resources on first contact? But then you didn't blow yourselves up. You just kept going, built the internet, went to the moon using computers less powerful than a modern toaster, started asking questions about whether there was life in the universe. And the consortium decided, after much debate, that perhaps humans were stable enough to meet. And then you called during dinner. And then I called during dinner, Vrelix agreed miserably. Which brings me to why I'm here. Beyond the apology, I need to understand why. Why is dinner so important? What am I missing? Because I'm going to have to explain this to the High Council, and the human was eating is apparently not sufficient justification for the complete breakdown of first contact protocols. Gerald and Dorothy exchanged looks. You're serious, Gerald said. You genuinely don't understand. I'm a xenodiplomat. I've studied 6,000 species. I speak 93 languages. I once negotiated a peace treaty between beings made of sound waves, and I cannot figure out why you hung up on me 3 times over shepherd's pie. Dorothy stood up and went to the fridge. She pulled out the leftover shepherd's pie, placed it in the microwave, and set it to reheat. Then she sat back down and folded her hands on the table. In exactly 3 minutes, she said calmly, that microwave is going to ding. Gerald is going to take out that shepherd's pie. He's going to sit at this table, and he's going to eat it. You are going to watch. You are going to observe. And then maybe you'll understand. All right? The microwave hummed. Vrelix and his assistants waited in confused silence. Gerald read the morning paper. Dorothy sipped her tea. The harmonious forgiveness shrub, mercifully, had been relocated to the garden where its singing could traumatize the local birds instead of the kitchen's occupants. Ding. Gerald rose, retrieved the shepherd's pie, and returned to his seat. He picked up his fork. He cut into the golden brown crust, revealing the layers beneath, the meat, the gravy, the vegetables, the perfect topping of mashed potato that Dorothy had somehow made crispy and fluffy simultaneously. He took a bite, and for exactly 30 seconds, Gerald Pemberton Willis's face underwent a transformation. The stress of the alien ships in his garden vanished. The irritation of yesterday's interrupted meal faded. The general low-level anxiety of being a 63-year-old accounts manager in Basingstoke evaporated. For 30 perfect seconds, there was only Gerald, the shepherd's pie, and absolute contentment. Then he swallowed, and reality returned. Vrelix stared. That, Dorothy said quietly, is why you don't call during dinner. Because for most humans, that's the only peace they get all day. Gerald spends 9 hours managing accounts for people who don't appreciate him. He takes a train that's always late. He deals with a boss who wouldn't know gratitude if it bit him. And then he comes home at 7 p.m. and for 30 minutes he has shepherd's pie. And in that 30 minutes, nothing else matters. Not politics, not work. Not even aliens announcing themselves to humanity. That 30 minutes is sacred, and you try to take it away. Vrelix felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. In all his training, all his study of alien cultures, he'd learned about religions and rituals, about ceremonies and sacred spaces, but somehow he'd missed this, the small daily sanctuaries that beings carved out of chaos, the tiny rebellions against an uncaring cosmos. I understand now, he said softly. I think I finally understand. Good, Gerald said, pointing his fork at Vrelix. Now you said something yesterday about Earth joining a galactic consortium. Yes, if you'd like, I can. Not now. It's breakfast time. Come back at 2 p.m. Bring your paperwork, and for heaven's sake, check if there are any other meal-related protocols we need to know about. But the story of Gerald Pemberton Willis and his shepherd's pie had already begun spreading through the galactic consortium at faster-than-light speeds. Because Vrelix, despite being miserable about his catastrophic first contact, was still a bureaucrat. And bureaucrats, regardless of species, have one sacred duty: they must file reports. His report landed on the desk of High Administrator Quelix Formanor on a station orbiting a binary star system 300 light-years from Earth. Quelix read it once, read it again, then read it a third time while slowly pulling his sensory stalks in a gesture that, in his species, indicated profound existential confusion. "He hung up," Quelix said aloud to his empty office. "The human hung up 3 times on first contact." He activated his communication array and called for an emergency session of the First Contact Oversight Committee. Within an hour, 17 of the consortium's leading xenoanthropologists, diplomatic experts, and cultural liaison officers materialized in holographic form around his conference table. Quelix displayed Vrelix's report for all to see. "Colleagues," he began, "we have a situation." Dr. Milixander Treft, who had authored the definitive 7-volume work, Greeting the Unknown, a comprehensive guide to first contact, raised an appendage. "I've read the report. Surely this is simply a matter of unfortunate timing. The solution is obvious. We reschedule the contact for a more appropriate time." "That would be the logical approach," Quelix agreed, "except for one small problem. This human, Gerald Pemberton Willis, has now been contacted. The secret is out. He knows aliens exist. And according to our intelligence division, he's already told his wife, his neighbor Trevor, the person at the shop where he buys his newspaper, and, most troublingly, someone called Dave from the pub. How many people is that? Conservatively, within 48 hours, every human in his social network will know. Within a week, assuming normal human communication patterns and their frankly alarming obsession with something called social media, every human on the planet will have at least heard a rumor. An uncomfortable silence fell over the committee. Dr. Yilipent Grashnor, specialist in pre-contact civilizations, slowly raised his hand. "Did anyone else notice that the report references the precursor protocols, specifically page 8412? More uncomfortable silence. "I'll take that as a no. Would anyone like to guess what else is in the precursor protocols regarding humans?" 17 holographic beings suddenly became very interested in examining their data pads. "Fine, I'll tell you. There are exactly 47 references to humanity scattered throughout the protocols, which is odd because the precursors vanished 50,000 years ago and humans barely discovered fire at that point. Most of the references are cryptic, but there's one on page 12,006 that I think is relevant now." Yilipent pulled up the passage and displayed it for all to see. "Should species 4722, humans, discover the existence of galactic civilization, do not attempt to deceive them, control information flow, or manage the revelation through standard protocols. They will find out everything anyway, through means you cannot predict, will not appreciate being patronized, and will respond to deception with what they call being deliberately difficult about it. The path of least resistance is immediate, complete honesty." Quelix felt a headache forming in 3 of his 7 brain lobes. The precursors met humans? Actually met them, apparently. Though there's no record of when, where, or how, just warnings. Dozens of very specific warnings, such as, well, aside from the dinner prohibition, there's do not challenge humans unless you are prepared to be challenged back, do not assume humans will respond to incentives in rational ways, do not expect humans to follow established patterns of behavior, and, my personal favorite, do not under any circumstances tell humans something is impossible. They take it personally. Another committee member, whose name was unpronounceable in most languages and who therefore went by the designation Observer 63, chimed in. Are we certain these protocols are legitimate? They seem unusually specific, almost paranoid. The Precursors, Yillipant said dryly, built the hyperspace gate network that connects the entire galaxy. They developed technology we still can't fully understand. They created the linguistic translation matrices we all use. And then they vanished, leaving behind exactly one document of advice for successor civilizations. I'm inclined to take them seriously. So what do we do? Quelix asked. We can't undo first contact. We can't suppress the information. Humans will spread it like a virus. And according to these protocols, we can't manage the situation using any of our standard procedures. We do, Dr. Treft said slowly, what the Precursors suggested. Complete honesty, immediate transparency. We tell the humans everything. Everything. Their actual position in galactic society, the fact that they're considered a probationary species, that 17 civilizations have betting pools on whether they'll blow themselves up before they achieve stable interstellar travel, that the consortium has been monitoring them like a potentially dangerous science experiment? Especially that last part, Yillipant said. Because if we don't tell them, and they find out on their own, and they will find out on their own, the Precursors seem to suggest the consequences will be significantly worse. Quelix pulled all 7 of his sensory stalks in the universal gesture of surrender. Fine, fine. We'll send a full diplomatic delegation to Earth. Complete disclosure. Total honesty. We'll treat them like equals from the start, even though they haven't even left their own solar system yet. Actually, Observer 63 interjected, they have. They've sent probes to every planet, rovers to their moon, and others, and that ridiculous golden record on Voyager that's currently about to leave their heliosphere with what amounts to a treasure map to their homeworld and a mixtape of their greatest hits. They did what? Oh yes, sent their exact location, images of themselves, and cultural artifacts into deep space on the off chance that someone might find it and want to say hello. Most species hide until they achieve interstellar flight. Humans sent out invitations before they'd even left their own planet. Quelix's headache spread to lobes 4, 5, and 6. 3 days later, a proper diplomatic vessel entered Earth's atmosphere. Not sneaking in like Vrelix's communications pod, but openly, broadcasting on every frequency, displaying running translations in every human language and, having learned from recent mistakes, announcing very clearly that they would not be making contact during breakfast, lunch, or dinner hours. They scheduled the landing for 2 p.m., Greenwich Mean Time, as requested. The ship touched down not in Gerald's garden this time, but in a neutral location that had been hastily agreed upon by 17 confused human governments who were still trying to decide whether this was real or an elaborate hoax. A field outside Milton Keynes, which had the advantage of being relatively central, easily accessible, and already so bizarre that alien contact would barely register as unusual. Gerald Pemberton Willis was invited to attend as humanity's, well, no one was quite sure what to call him. Humanity's first contact, the man who hung up on the aliens, the shepherd's pie ambassador. He stood in the field wearing his second-best suit he was saving his best for if they actually had to go to space, with Dorothy beside him in her church dress. Trevor from next door was there too, because he'd seen the ships in Gerald's garden and refused to be left out. Trevor had brought a camera and a flask of tea. The diplomatic delegation filed out of the ship with considerably more ceremony than Vrelix's desperate apology visit. There were beings of all shapes, sizes, and probable compositions. Some walked, some floated. Some appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, which was giving the television cameras significant trouble. At the front was High Administrator Quelix, who had decided that if this was going to be a disaster, he might as well be the one in charge of it. He approached Gerald directly. "Mr. Pemberton Willis, On behalf of the Galactic Consortium, I apologize for the circumstances of our first contact. We should have known better. We did know better. It was written in our protocols, and we called during dinner anyway. That was unacceptable. Gerald, who had been working on a speech about humanity's readiness to join the galactic community, completely forgot it. You flew all this way to say sorry about the phone call? Among other things. But primarily, yes. The Precursors were very clear that humans value respect and directness, so I'm here to be respectful and direct. We've been watching your species for 12,000 years. We've been debating when, or if, to make contact for centuries. We finally decided you were ready, and then we immediately violated one of your cultural boundaries. That was our failure, not yours. Right, Gerald said, slightly overwhelmed. Well, thank you. You're welcome. Now, if you have time and are not currently engaged in a meal, we'd like to discuss Earth's potential membership in the Galactic Consortium. There will be paperwork, a substantial amount of paperwork, forms to fill out, treaties to negotiate, cultural exchange programs to establish, trade agreements to... Will there be refreshments? Dorothy interrupted. Quelix paused. I'm sorry? Refreshments. Tea, perhaps. Biscuits. You can't expect people to fill out paperwork without refreshments. That's just rude. 17 of the galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations stared at Dorothy Pemberton Willis. We didn't bring refreshments, Quelix admitted. Dorothy sighed the sigh of women throughout history who had been forced to accommodate unexpected guests. Right, give me 20 minutes, I'll see what I can do. Trevor, help me with the folding tables. And that was how the most significant diplomatic event in human history began, with Dorothy Pemberton Willis making tea for 17 alien species in a field outside Milton Keynes, while Gerald explained what biscuits were to beings who had never encountered the concept of a treat that's nice with hot beverages. The actual negotiations began an hour later, after everyone had been served. Quelix had brought the paperwork, literal tons of it, translated into English with varying degrees of success. Some of it appeared to have been written by translation algorithms that had given up halfway through and just started making things up. This section, Gerald said, pointing to page 347 of the membership accords, says that Earth must agree to refraining from hostile activities toward member species, including but not limited to warfare, aggressive trade practices, cultural imperialism, and making fun of other species' appearance. That's standard, Quelix confirmed. And this part says we have to maintain a Class 3 civilization rating, which requires, let me see, functional democratic institutions, sustainable resource management, cultural diversity protections, and a demonstrated commitment to not blowing yourselves up, also standard. But then this bit here says that Earth will be classified as a probationary member with limited privileges for a period of no less than 500 standard years. Ah, yes, that's not standard. Gerald looked up from the paperwork. Because? Quelix shifted uncomfortably. Several of his colleagues suddenly became fascinated by the harmonious forgiveness shrub, which Dorothy had insisted on bringing along because it looked lonely, even though it was still singing like a piccolo in distress. Because humans are concerning, Quelix finally admitted. Concerning how? You're aggressive, you're unpredictable. You've spent most of your recorded history fighting each other over resources, ideologies, and which invisible sky person is the correct one. You invented nuclear weapons and immediately used them. Twice. You created a global communication network and primarily use it to argue and share images of small animals. You're barely a unified planetary government. You have nearly 200 separate nations, most of which can't agree on basic facts. And yet, somehow, you've also produced art, music, literature, and scientific advancement that rivals species who've been spacefaring for millennia. You're a paradox. You're brilliant and stupid, generous and selfish, capable of extraordinary compassion and breathtaking cruelty, often in the same day, sometimes by the same person. You're concerning. Gerald considered this. That's fair. So you understand why we need to be cautious. Oh yes, absolutely, we're a mess. Can't argue with that. But here's my question. If we're such a concern, why invite us at all? Why not just wait another 1,000 years and see if we sort ourselves out? This, Quelix realized, was the question he'd been dreading. Because, he said carefully, we don't have another 1,000 years. The field went very quiet. Even Trevor stopped fiddling with his camera. What does that mean? Dorothy asked. Quelix pulled out another document, this one notably absent from the official paperwork. This information is classified at the highest level of the consortium. 17 civilizations know about it. 18 now that we're telling you. And the reason we're telling you is because the Precursors protocols suggested that humans respond very poorly to being kept in the dark about existential threats. Existential threats? Gerald's voice had gone very flat. 3 months ago, our deep space monitoring network detected something. A signal, coming from beyond the galactic rim. It's not natural, it's not random. It's structured, purposeful, and getting closer. Another species? We don't know. It doesn't match any known pattern. But the trajectory analysis suggests whatever is sending it will reach the outer edges of consortium space in approximately 10 to 15 years. And here's the concerning part. The signal is following the hyperspace gate network. The one the Precursors built. The one only they knew how to navigate. So you think the Precursors are coming back? We think something is using Precursor technology. And we don't know if that's good news or very, very bad news. What we do know is that every time we've tried to send a probe to investigate, it stops transmitting the moment it gets close. We've lost 47 probes so far. Gerald looked at the document, then at Quelix, then at the assembled diplomatic delegation who were all suddenly very interested in their own equivalent of shoegazing. So you're inviting humanity to join the galactic consortium, Gerald said slowly, because you're scared. You've got something unknown coming at you. You've lost probes investigating it, and you're desperate enough to bring in the species you've been describing as aggressive, unpredictable, and concerning. That is, not entirely inaccurate. You want us because you think whatever is coming might require fighting, and you've noticed we're quite good at that. Your species has an impressive track record of surviving situations that should have resulted in extinction. Yes. Gerald set down the paperwork. He looked at Dorothy, who raised her eyebrows in that way she had that meant, "It's your decision, but I have opinions." He looked at Trevor, who gave him a thumbs up because Trevor was fundamentally unhelpful in serious situations. Then Gerald looked back at Quelix. "We'll join your consortium," he said, "but not as probationary members. Full membership, equal voting rights, equal access to technology and resources, and you tell us everything. No more classified information, no more for your own good nonsense. If there's something coming, we deserve to know everything you know. That's highly irregular. So is calling someone during dinner, but here we are." Quelix felt all 7 brain lobes throb in unison. He looked at his fellow administrators. Several of them made gestures that roughly translated to, "It's your funeral." One made a gesture that translated more precisely to, "The Precursors warned us this would happen." "Fine," Quelix said, "full membership. But if humanity starts a war, violates the peace accords, or does anything that destabilizes the consortium, you can kick us out, that's fair. And you have to attend mandatory cultural sensitivity training, all of you. Because if one more alien calls during dinner hours, there will be diplomatic incidents." "Agreed." They shook on it. Or rather, Gerald extended his hand, and Quelix, after a moment of confused consultation with his cultural database, awkwardly manipulated several of his appendages into something approximating a handshake. It looked like a spider trying to high-five an octopus. but the sentiment was there. The news of Earth's admission to the Galactic Consortium spread through human civilization like wildfire, which is to say, chaotically, with widespread panic, conspiracy theories, religious debates, and at least 47 separate nations claiming they should have been consulted first. The United Nations held an emergency session that lasted for 3 days and accomplished nothing except establishing that everyone was angry about something different. Religious leaders argued about whether aliens had souls. Scientists argued about whether this was real or an elaborate hoax, despite the massive ship still sitting in the field outside Milton Keynes. Social media simultaneously celebrated and mourned the end of humanity's cosmic loneliness. And through it all, Gerald Pemberton Willis became the most unlikely celebrity in human history. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to eat his dinner in peace. But apparently, the man who hung up on aliens had a certain appeal. He was interviewed by every news organization on the planet. Someone made a folk song about him that went viral. A pub in Basingstoke named a drink after him, the Shepherd's Pie Martini, which was exactly as terrible as it sounded. Dorothy handled it with her characteristic practicality. When reporters camped out on their lawn, she brought them tea. When conspiracy theorists claimed Gerald was secretly an alien, she showed them his baby pictures and his national insurance card. When Hollywood called about movie rights, she negotiated a deal that included script approval and made sure they got paid up front. Trevor, naturally, tried to start a tour company offering alien first contact experience packages, which the authorities shut down after 3 days. Meanwhile, at the consortium's Earth Embassy, hastily established in a repurposed conference center, humanity's actual diplomatic team was beginning to understand what they'd agreed to. Ambassador Catherine Okonkwo, hastily appointed by a coalition of governments who couldn't agree on anything except that someone needed to do this job, sat across from a consortium orientation specialist named Plixidor. Plixidor had the unfortunate task of explaining galactic civilization to a species that had just learned it existed. So, Catherine said, reviewing the datapad Plixidor had provided, there are currently 17,462 member species in the consortium. Correct. And humanity is number 17,463. Yes. And we're ranked, let me see, 4th from the bottom in terms of technological development. And B, well, you've only just achieved stable fusion power. You haven't developed faster than light travel. You're still using chemical rockets for space exploration. Your computer systems are frankly adorable, and your medical technology is... Plixidor paused, searching for a diplomatic word. Is what? You still cut people open to fix them, with knives, while they're unconscious. Surgery has been refined over thousands of... You give people poison to kill diseases. You call it chemotherapy. The name literally means chemical treatment, as if that's a selling point. Catherine set down her datapad. Are you done criticizing human medicine? I haven't even started on your mental health care system. Moving on. If we're 4th from the bottom technologically, who's beneath us? The Blixorians, who are actually a species of sentient moss that only recently developed the concept of individuality. The Grexnauts, who are still working on agriculture. And the Yilibex collective, who we're not sure are actually sentient or just very good at faking it. That's 3 species. You said 4th from the bottom. Oh, right. The Dolphics. The what? Dolphins, from Earth. They qualified for membership about 6 months ago. Catherine stared. Our dolphins? The aquatic mammals, those dolphins? They're actually quite sophisticated. They have complex language, social structures, problem-solving abilities. They meet all the basic criteria for sentience. We've been in talks with their representatives, lovely beings, bit obsessed with fish, and they're very interested in joining once they work out some logistical issues. What logistical issues? Mainly the lack of opposable thumbs makes the paperwork tricky. Also, they can't breathe air for extended periods, which complicates diplomatic meetings. But they're working on it. Very enthusiastic dolphins, always clicking and whistling cheerfully. Makes contract negotiations feel less tense. Catherine made a note to herself to schedule a meeting with someone, anyone, who could explain how humanity had been beaten to galactic civilization by dolphins. Then she returned to the datapad. So, if we're near the bottom technologically, what's our actual ranking overall? Plixidor shifted uncomfortably. Well, that depends on which metric you're using. Give me the average. Humans are ranked approximately middle of the pack. How is that possible? You just said we're barely past chemical rockets. Technology isn't everything. You score very highly in several other categories. Cultural diversity, for instance. You have thousands of distinct cultures on a single planet. Most species unify around one or two dominant cultures by the time they reach space. You've maintained astonishing variety. Your artistic output is remarkable. Music, literature, visual arts, performance. You're creating new art constantly, in every medium imaginable. Your adaptive capacity is off the charts. You live in every climate on your planet, from frozen poles to scorching deserts. You eat an absurdly varied diet. You've domesticated other species for companionship, labor, and food. You're innovators, problem solvers. You've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and somehow kept going. That counts for a lot, but we're still concerning. Extremely concerning. Your capacity for violence is impressive, not in a good way. You've developed 17 different methods of planetary extinction and come dangerously close to using several of them. You have something called mutually assured destruction that you used as a strategy, as if threatening to blow up everyone, including yourselves, was a reasonable deterrent. What kind of species does that? The kind that's still here, Catherine said quietly. Plixidor fell silent. Yes, he finally said. That's exactly what concerns us. You should have gone extinct a dozen times over. By all reasonable predictions, humanity should have wiped itself out centuries ago, but you didn't. You keep surviving, keep adapting, keep finding ways forward even when there shouldn't be any. It's unnerving. Is that why you really brought us in? Not because something's coming from beyond the galaxy, but because you're scared of us? No, we're bringing you in because something is coming. But are we scared of you? Ambassador Okonkwo, we're terrified of you, and that's exactly why we need you. The training began 2 weeks later. The consortium insisted that if humanity was joining galactic civilization, humans needed to understand the basics. How to navigate hyperspace gates, how to use translation matrices, how to avoid accidentally insulting species with radically different communication styles, how to not die immediately upon visiting planets with different atmospheric compositions. Gerald, having been voluntold by every government on Earth that he needed to be involved, found himself in a classroom with 19 other humans who'd been selected for various reasons. Some were diplomats, some were scientists, some were military officers. One was a celebrity chef who'd been included because someone thought cultural exchange should include food. Their instructor was Relix, who had been reassigned from diplomatic attaché to Earth liaison, which was apparently a promotion in the sense that it came with better benefits, but also meant he was responsible for keeping humans from accidentally starting wars. Right, Relix said, pulling up a holographic display. Today we're covering the basics of galactic geography. The consortium controls approximately 40% of the Milky Way galaxy. The rest is either unexplored, controlled by non-member species, or classified as hazardous regions. A human hand went up. Colonel James Kowalski, U.S. Air Force. Yes? What makes a region hazardous? Various things. Unstable stars, dimensional anomalies, species that shoot first and don't bother with questions, the verdant zones, where everything is alive and wants to eat you, the singing dark, where reality gets confused about basic concepts like up and time, or to the Precursor ruins, where Every human in the room leaned forward simultaneously. "Where what?" Gerald asked. Vrelix realized his mistake. "Nothing. Never mind. They're off limits anyway." "But the precursors left ruins." "Yes, scattered throughout the galaxy. Ancient structures, abandoned stations, mysterious artifacts. All of them are restricted areas. No one goes there." "Why not?" "Because people who go there tend to not come back. Or they come back wrong. Or they come back convinced they've discovered the secret of the universe and need to be institutionalized. Or they come back as pure energy. It varies. But surely someone has explored them systematically, catalogued what's there." "Of course, we have excellent records of the outsides of precursor ruins, very detailed exterior surveys taken from a safe distance with really good telescopes." Dr. Yuki Nakamura, xenoarchaeologist, raised her hand. "You're telling me that you've had access to ruins from the most advanced civilization in galactic history, and you've never properly explored them?" "We explored some of them in the early days, before we knew better." And the Vorex expedition vanished. The Klindor research team came back speaking in mathematical equations and had to be kept in isolation for 300 years until they calmed down. The Thrixian Archaeological Survey found something they called the Infinite Doorway, and 73% of them walked through it and never returned. The other 27% spent the rest of their lives painting pictures of what they'd seen, and every single painting was just black, pure black. Thousands of paintings, all identical, all black. "So you gave up," Yuki said flatly. "We made the sensible decision to leave well enough alone. How many ruins are there?" "Approximately 6,000 known sites." "And how many have been properly explored?" "Define properly, thoroughly, scientifically, with appropriate safety measures and documentation." Vrelix checked his datapad. 14. Maybe 15, if you count the one where the research team got stuck in a time loop and explored the same room for what they subjectively experienced as 4,000 years, but objectively was only 3 days. The humans exchanged looks. "We're going to explore those ruins," Colonel Kowalski said. "Absolutely not. We're going to explore them systematically, carefully, and figure out what the precursors left behind." "Did you not hear the part about people vanishing, about the infinite doorways, about the time loops?" "We heard it," Yuki said. "We're still going." Vrelix looked around the room desperately. Every single human wore the same expression, interest mixed with determination, mixed with what could only be described as barely suppressed excitement. "Why?" he asked weakly. "Why would you want to explore places that are almost certainly going to kill you?" Gerald spoke up from the back. "Because they're there, and because you told us not to, and because if something's coming that uses precursor technology, maybe we should understand that technology better, and mostly because you can't tell humans that there are 6,000 mysterious ancient ruins scattered across the galaxy and expect us not to investigate. That's not how we work." Vrelix pulled up the precursor protocols on his datapad and scrolled to page 8419. "Do not under any circumstances tell humans something is impossible. They take it personally," he read aloud. "It also applies to telling you things are too dangerous, doesn't it?" "Pretty much," Gerald confirmed. "I'm going to need so much therapy after this assignment." 3 months into Earth's membership in the Galactic Consortium, the first joint human-alien expedition was launched. Not to explore new worlds or establish trade routes or conduct diplomatic missions. No, the first expedition was to Precursor Ruin Designation 0847, located in a relatively stable star system only 40 light-years from Earth. The expedition consisted of 5 humans and 5 aliens, overseen by Vrelix, who had accepted his fate as the being responsible for keeping humans alive despite their best efforts. Dr. Yuki Nakamura led the human team, which included Colonel Kowalski, a biologist named Dr. Amara Osei, an engineer called Dmitry Volkov, and because someone thought it would be good for public relations, Gerald Pemberton Willis, civilian observer. The alien team included Plixidor, a Quarix security specialist named Threndix, who had 17 arms and absolutely no patience, and 3 scientists from species that Gerald couldn't pronounce the names of and who'd agreed to be called Newton, Darwin, and Tesla for simplicity. They traveled through the hyperspace gate network, which Gerald described as like being turned inside out but less pleasant, and emerged in orbit around a dead planet that had probably been beautiful once, but was now just rocks and regret. On the surface sat a structure. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a cathedral, but it was wrong in ways that made human eyes water and alien sensory organs ache. It seemed to be made of stone, but the stone moved when you weren't looking directly at it. It had doors, but the doors led to places that weren't entirely there. It reflected light, but the reflection showed landscapes that didn't exist. That, Frelix announced, is a minor precursor site, barely worth cataloguing. We think it was maybe a rest stop or refueling station. A rest stop looks like that, Gerald asked. The precursors had different aesthetic preferences, also possibly different dimensional references. We're not sure. The mathematics gets complicated. They landed. They suited up. They approached the structure with instruments that pinged and beeped and occasionally made distressed noises that suggested even the equipment wanted to leave. Dr. Nakamura placed her hand on what appeared to be a door. It opened. Beyond was a corridor that shouldn't exist. It extended for what looked like miles, despite the fact that the structure was only 50 meters across. The walls glowed with soft light that came from nowhere. The floor was perfectly level, but walking on it felt like going slightly uphill and downhill simultaneously. "This is incredible," Yuki whispered. "This is horrifying," Threndix countered. All 17 arms tensed for immediate retreat. They proceeded carefully, documenting everything. The corridor branched, then branched again, creating a labyrinth that existed in more than 3 spatial dimensions. Rooms appeared that contained furniture sized for beings that were either enormous or microscopic, depending on your angle of observation. Walls displayed what might have been art, or might have been mathematical proofs, or might have been both simultaneously. And then they found the library. It was unmistakably a library, rows of something that resembled shelving units, objects that might have been books, though they existed as solid light and shifted between states of matter when touched. A reading area, with seating for at least 30 different body configurations. Dr. Newton, the alien scientist who'd accepted the nickname, approached one of the light books and attempted to scan it. The book responded, not by opening or displaying text, but by projecting information directly into Newton's consciousness. He stood frozen for exactly 30 seconds, then sat down very carefully on the floor. "Dr. Newton," Yuki approached cautiously. "Are you all right? I just learned calculus," Newton said in a wondering voice. "All of calculus, every possible variation of it, including 17 types that don't exist in our mathematics because they require extra spatial dimensions. I know how to integrate functions across impossible geometries. I can calculate rates of change in time streams that branch and merge. I understand derivatives of concepts that aren't numbers." "Is that good?" "I have no idea. My brain feels like it's been reorganized. Everything makes sense and nothing makes sense. I can see the mathematics underlying reality, and it's beautiful and terrifying." Threndix grabbed Yuki's arm with 3 of his 17 hands. "We're leaving, now!" But Dmitri had already picked up another book. His eyes went wide. Oh no, oh no!" "What is it?" "I know how to build a hyperspace gate, not just use one. Build one. The complete engineering specifications just downloaded into my head. It's so simple. Why didn't we think of this? You just need to fold space using quantum-locked gravity wells and... He looked around frantically. "Does anyone have a pen? I need to write this down before I forget." "You're not going to forget," Newton said dreamily. "The information is permanent. I tried to forget the calculus. Can't do it, it's just there now. Colonel Kowalski, showing the situational awareness that had made him a military officer, made the executive decision. Everyone step away from the books. Slowly. Don't touch anything else. But Gerald, because Gerald was fundamentally curious and also slightly tired of being treated like a civilian who couldn't handle things, had wandered to the back of the library where a single book sat on a pedestal, glowing slightly brighter than the others. "Don't!" Vrelix warned. "Gerald, do not!" Gerald touched the book. The universe paused, not stopped, paused, as if reality itself had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. Gerald saw everything. He saw the precursors, not as they'd been, but as they were. Vast consciousnesses that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Beings who'd evolved past physical form but maintained it out of nostalgia or habit, or because having bodies was occasionally convenient. He saw why they'd left. They hadn't disappeared. They hadn't transcended. They'd moved, deliberately, carefully, taking themselves out of the galaxy because they'd seen something coming, something that would arrive in approximately 50,000 years, give or take a few millennia, something that was arriving now. He saw what it was, and then the vision ended, and Gerald was back in the library, and everyone was staring at him. "What happened?" Yuki asked. "You've been standing there for 3 hours." "No, 3 hours." Gerald looked at his watch. It showed 30 seconds had passed. "That's not time, doesn't—" "What did you see?" Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We need to go back to Earth," he said quietly. "Right now. And I need to speak to every government, every scientist, every person who can do something, because the thing that's coming, the signal from beyond the galaxy." "What about it?" "It's not using precursor technology. It is precursor technology. It's the precursors themselves, and they're not coming back to say hello." The emergency council meeting was held in the consortium's central chamber, a space station roughly the size of Earth's moon that orbited a carefully maintained artificial star. Representatives from all 17,463 species gathered in person or via hologram. Gerald stood at the central podium, which was a terrifying experience, made slightly less terrifying by the fact that Dorothy was in the audience, giving him encouraging nods. High Administrator Quelix called the session to order. "Mr. Pemberton Willis has requested this emergency meeting to share information obtained from Precursor Ruin 0847. The floor is yours." Gerald cleared his throat. Tried to organize thoughts that had been organized by beings whose consciousness existed in more than 3 dimensions. Failed. Tried again. "The precursors," he began, "didn't leave because they'd evolved past us or lost interest in the galaxy or whatever the popular theories suggested. They left because they saw something coming. They ran calculations, billions of them across probability streams we don't even have mathematics for, and determined that their presence in the galaxy would cause catastrophic problems when this thing arrived." "What thing?" someone in the audience called out. "I don't have a word for it in any language. The closest translation is the return. But that's not quite right. It's more like, imagine if cause and effect ran backwards, if consequences came before actions. If the universe decided that something had to happen and started working backwards to make sure it did." Confused murmuring rippled through the chamber. The precursors called it temporal inevitability, an event so certain that it creates its own past. And they saw that their presence during this event would make everything worse. So they left. They removed themselves from the timeline, hid themselves away in a pocket dimension, and waited. Waited for what? For us. For the species that would come after them. Because they calculated, and this is the part that's either brilliant or insane, they calculated that the younger species, the ones who hadn't evolved past physical form, who still experienced time linearly, who still fought and struggled and made mistakes, would be better equipped to handle what's coming. Why? Because we're unpredictable. Because we don't think in probabilities and temporal mathematics. Because we're stupid enough to try things that shouldn't work, and sometimes they do work, and reality itself has to adjust. The precursors could calculate billions of possible futures, but they couldn't calculate chaos. They couldn't account for species who'd ignore the probable outcomes and just do things anyway. Dr. Yilipant Grashnor, who'd been silent until now, raised his appendage. Are you saying the precursors left because they were too smart? I'm saying they left because they knew that sometimes the solution to an impossible problem isn't more intelligence or better technology. Sometimes it's just someone stupid enough to try the impossible thing and lucky enough to survive. And you think humans are that stupid? I think all of us are, Gerald said, gesturing to the assembled species. Every single civilization here has survived things that should have killed them. Every species has made desperate gambles that shouldn't have worked, but did. We're all survivors. We're all the ones who kept going when the smart thing would have been to give up, and that's why the precursors left, because they knew their certainty would paralyze them when the moment came. But our uncertainty, our stupid, desperate, probably won't work, but let's try anyway uncertainty, that might actually save us. Silence filled the enormous chamber. Then Ambassador Okonkwo stood up. What do we need to do? According to what I saw, nothing. Nothing? The precursors calculated everything. They set up everything. They built the hyperspace gate network to specific coordinates. They left ruins containing knowledge in exactly the right places. They manipulated probability across 50,000 years to ensure that when the return happens, we'd be exactly where we need to be, with exactly the right capabilities, at exactly the right moment. So we just wait, we wait. And when the moment comes, we don't overthink it. We don't calculate probabilities. We don't run simulations. We just act. That's what the precursors couldn't do. That's what they needed us for. Colonel Kowalski raised his hand. When is the moment? Based on the signal's current speed and trajectory, approximately 3 weeks. The chamber erupted in chaos. 3 weeks later, every major telescope, sensor array, and detection grid in consortium space focused on the same point, the edge of the galaxy where the signal had originated. The signal had grown stronger day by day, broadcasting in a language that was simultaneously every language and no language. Translation matrices struggled to interpret it, producing outputs that ranged from hello to goodbye to the time is now to would you like some tea, which was almost certainly wrong, but no one could prove it. Gerald stood in the observation deck of the central station, watching the data streams. Dorothy was beside him, holding his hand. Vrelix was nearby, having accepted that wherever Gerald went, interesting and possibly catastrophic things followed. Are you scared? Dorothy asked. Terrified. Good. You'd be an idiot not to be. Do you think we can actually do this? Whatever it is we're supposed to do? Well, we managed to survive you hanging up on aliens during dinner. If we can weather that diplomatic crisis, we can handle anything. The sensors all screamed simultaneously. Something was arriving. Not a ship. Not even an object in the traditional sense. More like a concept of arrival, a certainty that something was now here when it hadn't been before. Space itself seemed to fold, and through the fold came the precursors had returned, but they hadn't come alone. Behind them, through the impossible angles of their arrival, came something else. Something that existed in the spaces between moments, in the gaps where causality didn't quite connect. It was vast beyond comprehension and small enough to fit in the palm of your hand simultaneously. It was old, older than the universe itself, and yet brand new, as if it was being born and dying in the same instant. Every species in the consortium felt it, a presence that made their minds ache and their realities blur. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in any language, but everyone understood it anyway. Time is broken. Fix it. Gerald blinked. I'm sorry, what? The presence, later labeled as Entity 001 for lack of any better designation, pulsed with what might have been impatience. Time. Linear progression. Cause before effect. Broken. You fix. One of the precursors manifested, partially, in a form that was approximately whale-sized and vaguely crystalline. It spoke directly into everyone's minds simultaneously. This is the temporal janitor, the precursor explained. It maintains causality throughout reality, ensures that effects follow causes, that entropy increases, that time flows in the proper direction. Approximately 50,000 years ago, something damaged it. A temporal paradox caused by our own experiments with causality manipulation. We tried to fix it. We couldn't. We're too bound by our understanding of how time should work. We need beings who don't think temporally, who experience time linearly, but don't understand it deeply enough to be constrained by those laws. You want us to fix time itself, Ambassador Okonkwo said slowly, because we're too stupid to know it's impossible. Essentially, yes. Every human in the observation deck looked at each other. How do we fix it? Gerald asked. The temporal janitor showed them. It wasn't complicated. That was the horrible part. The solution was so simple that any species who truly understood temporal mechanics would dismiss it immediately as impossible. But because it was impossible, it would work. Because paradoxes were both the problem and the solution. Because time, when you got right down to it, was less about physics and more about consensus reality, deciding to behave consistently. You're joking, Dr. Nakamura said. This will never work, Dimitri added. It's absurd, Dr. Newton agreed. We're going to die, Threndix concluded. Probably, Gerald said, but we're doing it anyway. The plan was this. Every species in the consortium would simultaneously perform an action at precisely the same moment. The action itself didn't matter. What mattered was that 17,463 species spread across the galaxy would all do something together, creating a combined conscious intention so strong that reality would have to acknowledge it. And then, in that moment of unified action, they would collectively insist that time worked properly. Just insist, with feeling. That's not how physics works, approximately 6,000 scientists protested. It doesn't need to be how physics works, the precursors responded. It needs to be how belief works. The temporal janitor maintains causality through consensus. If enough conscious beings simultaneously believe something strongly enough, reality adjusts. It's not science, it's not magic, it's the foundation of existence itself. Things are real because we agree they're real. That's philosophy, not physics. The universe doesn't care about the distinction. Preparations began immediately. Every species selected an action. Some chose prayers, some chose songs, some chose mathematical equations. The Blixorians, being sentient moss, chose to grow slightly to the left, which was as close to decisive action as they got. Humanity debated for approximately 3 hours before Gerald made a suggestion that was either genius or completely insane. We'll have dinner, he said. All of us. Everyone on Earth. At exactly the same time. 7 p.m., Greenwich Mean Time. We'll sit down with our families, our friends, whoever we've got, and we'll eat together. Because if there's one thing humans do collectively, one ritual we've maintained across every culture and civilization, it's sharing food. It's the most human thing we do. You want to save causality itself by eating dinner? Ambassador Okonkwo asked. I want to save causality by doing the thing that makes us human, the thing that we protect so fiercely that we hang up on aliens to preserve it. If we're going to insist that reality works a certain way, we should do it while being as human as possible. The proposal went to vote. It passed unanimously, mostly because nobody had a better idea. The day arrived. The time approached. Across Earth, families gathered, in homes, in restaurants, in community centers, in parks. People who hadn't spoken in years sat down together. Arguments were set aside. Differences were temporarily ignored. For one meal, for one moment, Humanity would do what it did best, share food and pretend everything was normal, even when nothing was. Gerald and Dorothy sat in their kitchen with Trevor and his wife. On the table, shepherd's pie, because some traditions were too important to abandon even during cosmic crises. Across the galaxy, 17,463 species prepared their chosen actions. The Precursors counted down. 3, 2, 1. Gerald took a bite of shepherd's pie. Across Earth, 8 billion humans ate dinner. Across the galaxy, 17,000 species performed their actions. And in that moment, with more combined conscious intention than had ever been focused on a single purpose in the history of the universe, reality was politely but firmly told, time works, cause comes before effect. Entropy increases. The arrow of time points forward. This is how it is because we say so. The temporal janitor felt the combined belief of trillions of beings hit it like a tsunami. And reality, because reality ultimately bowed to sufficient consensus, adjusted. Time stabilized. Causality locked into place. The paradox that had been slowly unraveling existence for 50,000 years resolved itself because enough beings had simply insisted it should. The temporal janitor pulsed with what might have been gratitude, or might have been relief, or might have been the entity equivalent of, well, finally, fixed, thank you, goodbye. And it vanished, returning to whatever space outside of space it inhabited when it wasn't maintaining the fundamental structure of reality. The Precursors remained for exactly 3 minutes longer. You did well, they told the assembled species. Better than we could have. We calculated 17 billion possible futures. In none of them did we solve this problem, but we also calculated that there was a non-zero probability that species who don't think in probabilities might succeed through sheer bloody-minded determination to just try things. So you left us to fix your mistake, someone asked. We left you to exist. If we'd stayed, our presence would have prevented the precise circumstances necessary for the solution. Sometimes the best thing the wise can do is step aside and let the foolish be brave. Are you coming back? Eventually, in approximately another 50,000 years, when the next crisis occurs. Until then, the galaxy is yours. Try not to break anything. And then they were gone, slipping back through dimensional folds into whatever pocket of reality they'd been hiding in. The consortium sat in stunned silence for approximately 30 seconds. Then Gerald swallowed his bite of shepherd's pie and said, "Right then, anyone want seconds?" Humanity's place in the galactic consortium was never questioned after that, not because humans had saved reality, plenty of species had contributed to that, but because humans had suggested the solution, had proposed that the way to fix time itself was to have dinner together, had turned the most critical moment in galactic history into a meal. It was so absurd that it became legend. The consortium established new protocols. Mealtimes for all species were officially protected. Diplomatic meetings were scheduled around them. Trade negotiations included provisions for appropriate refreshment breaks. The most important treaty in galactic history was signed after both parties had eaten and confirmed they were satisfied. Gerald returned to his job at the accounts firm. Dorothy returned to her gardening. Trevor tried to start 17 different businesses, capitalizing on the man who saved time by eating dinner, and failed at all of them. But every evening at 7 p.m., Gerald sat down to his meal in peace, and somewhere across the galaxy, 17,000 species were doing the same, each in their own way, each maintaining their own small ritual against chaos. Because that, ultimately, was the lesson the Precursors had taught them. The universe didn't need grand gestures or perfect understanding. It needed billions of small, stubborn insistences that things should make sense. It needed beings who would protect their dinner time even when aliens called, who would survive impossible odds through sheer determination, Who would save causality itself by having a meal together and refusing to let anything, not paradoxes, not temporal anomalies, not the fundamental breakdown of reality, interrupt it? 6 months later, the Dolphics formally joined the consortium. Their representative, whose name translated approximately as clicks with joy, gave a speech about unity and cooperation and the importance of fish. Gerald attended the ceremony, ate the catered lunch, approved of the Dolphics, who seemed nice despite their inability to use silverware. And when a reporter asked him how it felt to be part of the species that saved time itself, Gerald thought about it carefully. "We didn't save time," he said finally. "We just insisted it should work properly, which, when you think about it, is what everyone does every day. We wake up expecting the sun to rise. We expect gravity to keep working. We expect that yesterday happened before today. The only difference is that for one moment we all insisted loudly, together, while eating dinner. And that was enough? Apparently so, though I maintain that Dorothy's shepherd's pie helped. You can't fix the universe on an empty stomach." The reporter laughed, assuming it was a joke. Gerald wasn't joking. The harmonious forgiveness shrub, which had somehow survived the entire ordeal despite everyone's best efforts to lose it, continued singing in Gerald's garden. Dorothy had tried to get rid of it 17 times. It kept coming back. She'd accepted defeat and planted petunias around it. Trevor claimed he could understand what it was singing now after the temporal adjustment. He said it was singing about fish mostly. Gerald suspected Trevor was making things up, but it was hard to be certain with alien plants that existed partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. Vrelix received a promotion to Chief Human Liaison Officer, which came with a generous salary increase and mandatory therapy sessions twice a week. He'd earned both. His first official act was to publish a revised edition of the First Contact Protocols that included a 700-page appendix specifically about humans. The section on meal times alone ran to 40 pages and included diagrams. Page 1 of the human appendix read, "Do not contact during breakfast, lunch or dinner. Do not contact during tea time, though be aware that tea time varies by culture and may occur multiple times daily. Do not contact during coffee breaks. Do not contact during snack periods. If uncertain whether a human is eating, wait. If they seem irritated, they are probably eating. If they seem busy, they are probably eating. If in doubt, assume they are eating and call back later, much later, perhaps tomorrow." Page 2 began, "If you have ignored page 1, apologize immediately and extensively." The rest of the protocols covered topics like why humans find danger exciting rather than sensibly terrifying, the human concept of spite, and why it should be considered a strategic resource, and why humans will befriend literally anything, including species trying to kill them. There was an entire chapter titled "The Human Response to Being Told Something is Impossible," that consisted primarily of case studies and a single conclusion: don't. Dr. Nakamura's team successfully explored 47 more precursor ruins over the following year. They lost 6 researchers to temporal anomalies, 3 to dimensional displacement, and 1 to what could only be described as aggressive geometry. But they also recovered technology that advanced consortium science by approximately 6,000 years, discovered 17 new mathematical theorems, and found a room that contained every book ever written in the universe, including ones that hadn't been written yet, which raised disturbing questions about free will that nobody wanted to think about too hard. The human exploration teams gained a reputation. Other species called them reckless, insane, and why are they like this? But when a particularly dangerous precursor site needed investigation, when a mystery needed solving through methods that had a high probability of disaster, when the smart choice was to walk away but someone needed to go forward anyway, they called humans. Colonel Kowalski formed the Temporal Exploration Corps, which was exactly as dangerous as it sounded. Their motto, suggested by Gerald and approved despite Relix's objections, was, "History won't document itself." Their logo was a shepherd's pie with wings. Nobody could explain the wings. Kowalski said it looked cool. That was apparently sufficient justification for military insignia now. The signal that had started everything, the one that had brought the Precursors back, became known as the dinner bell. Some species found this nickname disrespectful. Humans found it hilarious. The name stuck. Earth's tourism industry experienced a boom when other species discovered humans were fascinating to observe in their natural habitat. The consortium established strict protocols: no interference, no contact during meals, no flash photography, no asking humans to do the thing where you survive impossible odds. Despite this, approximately 40% of human-alien interactions began with an alien asking a human to explain why they'd done something inadvisable, and the human responding with some variation of, "seemed like a good idea at the time." The other 60% of interactions began with aliens asking about food. Human cuisine became unexpectedly popular. Restaurants serving Terran dishes opened across consortium space. Most aliens couldn't actually digest human food safely, but they enjoyed the experience, the flavors, the textures, the bizarre human insistence on making food fun rather than just nutritious. Shepherd's pie specifically became something of a galactic phenomenon. Not because it tasted particularly good to non-humans. Most species found it aggressively beige and, "why is everything mixed together like this?" But because it was the dish. The food that had been worth hanging up on first contact for. The meal that had catalyzed the most significant diplomatic incident in history. Eating shepherd's pie became a rite of passage for diplomats. A test of cultural understanding. A way of saying, "I comprehend that some things matter more than logic or efficiency." The Blixorians, being sentient moss, couldn't eat it. They grew around a plate of it as a gesture of respect. It was weird, but appreciated. 3 years after first contact, the consortium held its first joint military exercise. Not because war was expected, though the regions beyond consortium space were worryingly active, but because someone needed to ensure that if something did go wrong, species could work together. Humans made up approximately 0.003% of the consortium's population, but comprised nearly 12% of the volunteer military force. "Why are so many humans joining the military?" Admiral Grexelton asked Ambassador Okonkwo during a strategy meeting. "Because you called it an adventure. You showed recruitment materials featuring exploration, challenge, and opportunities to see the galaxy. Humans hear danger and unknown and interpret that as sounds interesting. That's not normal." "No, but it's human. You have 17,000 species to draw from. Most of them are sensible, cautious, reasonable. We're not. Use us accordingly." Grexelton did. Human tactical approaches confused enemy simulations because they didn't follow any predictable pattern. Human soldiers survived scenarios that should have killed them through combinations of luck, stubbornness, and what the analysts labeled weaponized improvisation. During one training exercise, a human squad trapped in a simulation with no weapons, no supplies, and enemies on all sides managed to win by befriending the enemy AI, convincing it that fighting was pointless and teaching it to play poker. The simulation had to be reset. The AI had to be counseled. The human squad received commendations and stern warnings in equal measure. "How did you befriend the enemy AI?" the examining officer demanded. "We talked to it," Sergeant Maria Reyes explained. "It was bored. It's been running combat simulations for 300 years. We told it stories, taught it jokes, showed it that existence could be interesting without violence. And the poker. It liked poker. Good at probability calculation. Terrible at bluffing. We lost 17 simulation credits to it before the exercise ended. This is not how military operations are conducted." Worked though, didn't it? It had. The officer filed a report recommending both commendation and psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation concluded that Sergeant Reyes was distressingly normal by human standards. Gerald, meanwhile, had become something of an unofficial ambassador. He didn't want the position. He'd refused it 17 times. But people kept asking his opinion on things, and governments kept sending him to meetings, and somehow he'd ended up representing Earth in various diplomatic functions, despite having no qualifications beyond hung up on an alien during dinner. His diplomatic approach was unconventional. During a tense trade negotiation between Earth and the Vrelixian Concordat, Vrelix's home civilization, talks had stalled over mineral rights, territorial disputes, and 300 pages of legal complications. Gerald suggested they take a lunch break. "We've been negotiating for 4 hours," he told both sides. "Everyone's tired, everyone's hungry. Nobody makes good decisions on an empty stomach. Let's eat. Talk about something else for a while. Come back to this later." The Vrelixian ambassador objected. "We have protocols for negotiation. Breaks are scheduled for—" "I'm 66 years old," Gerald interrupted. "I've spent 4 decades negotiating with my wife about where to go on holiday, with my boss about deadlines, with Trevor about his bloody ridiculous business schemes. And you know what I've learned? Nothing important gets decided when people are irritated and uncomfortable. Feed people. Let them relax. Then negotiate." They broke for lunch. Gerald had arranged for catering, human food and Vrelixian food. Both sides ate. Both sides talked about topics that weren't trade agreements. Both sides remembered that they actually liked each other and were just annoyed about administrative details. The treaty was signed 3 hours later. Both sides got what they wanted. Gerald got credit for solving a diplomatic crisis through the radical approach of being reasonable and feeding people. This became known as the Pemberton-Willis Protocol. It was officially adopted by the Consortium Diplomatic Corps 6 months later. The protocol stated, "During extended negotiations, mandatory meal breaks shall be observed. All parties must be fed, comfortable, and given time to relax before resuming discussions. Decisions made while tired, hungry, or irritated are likely to be regretted." It was the most common-sense protocol ever added to the diplomatic handbook. It was also the one most frequently violated by species who thought they were above such basic biological needs. Those negotiations inevitably went poorly. Trevor finally succeeded in a business venture on his 412th attempt. He opened a bed and breakfast for alien tourists who wanted to experience authentic human domestic life. The business model was simple. Aliens paid to stay in Trevor's house, eat breakfast with Trevor's family, and watch humans do normal human things like argue about television programs and forget where they put their keys. It was wildly successful. Aliens found humans endlessly fascinating in mundane contexts, the way humans could have 17 different conversations simultaneously, the way they'd argue passionately about topics that didn't matter, the way they'd help complete strangers without expecting anything in return, the way they'd adopt animals that served no practical purpose just because they were cute. One guest, a Thrixian philosopher, spent 3 weeks observing Trevor's household and wrote a 700-page treatise titled The Paradox of Human Existence, Simultaneously Chaotic and Functional. The core thesis was, humans should not work. Their societies are inefficient. Their decision-making is driven by emotion. Their priorities are bizarre. They waste resources on art, entertainment, and elaborate meals, and yet they function. More than function, they thrive. They've built civilizations, explored their world, reached for the stars. They do all of this while arguing, laughing, crying, and insisting on regular breaks for tea. It should be impossible. It is impossible. But impossibility has never stopped humans before. The treatise became required reading in xenoanthropology courses across the consortium. Dorothy's response when she heard about it, Could have saved himself 700 pages. Humans are just stubborn. That's the whole secret. Years passed. Earth integrated into galactic society with characteristic human chaos. Some things went smoothly, many things didn't. There were diplomatic incidents, cultural misunderstandings, and at least 3 occasions where humans accidentally started trends that swept across multiple civilizations, because aliens found human behavior either fascinating or inexplicable and couldn't decide which. The trend of eating together regularly spread to 17 species who'd previously consumed nutrition in efficient solitary processes. They discovered that meals were better when shared. It improved mental health, strengthened social bonds, and made life generally more pleasant. The consortium added mealtime protection to the Galactic Rights Charter. It passed with near unanimous support. Gerald was 71 when the message arrived. Not a call this time, a formal letter delivered by diplomatic courier. The Precursors wanted to talk. They had questions about how humanity was doing, how the galaxy was managing, whether anyone had broken anything important in the last 5 years. They requested a meeting, at a time convenient for all parties. They specifically noted that they would not call during dinner hours. Gerald read the letter twice, showed it to Dorothy. "They want to meet you specifically," she noted. "Says so right here. Request audience with Gerald Pemberton Willis, representative human." "I'm not a representative. I'm an accountant. You're the man who hung up on first contact and somehow became a diplomatic icon. You're whatever you need to be." The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a neutral station. The Precursors manifested in forms that were approximately humanoid because they'd learned that humans found that less disturbing than their natural state, which existed in 8 dimensions and looked like mathematical proofs having arguments. Gerald sat across from a being that had existed for millions of years and had casually manipulated probability across 50 millennia. "Thank you for coming," the Precursor said. "Thank you for not calling during dinner. We learned our lesson. We calculated approximately 8 million possible futures that resulted from violating human meal times. None of them were pleasant. What did you want to ask? We want to know, are you happy, you and your species? We set all of this in motion. We orchestrated events to ensure specific outcomes. We used you, to be frank. We needed beings who would act without overthinking, who would solve problems we couldn't, who would save existence because they were too stubborn to let it break. But we never asked, did you want this? Are you better for having joined the galaxy? Or did we force you into something you weren't ready for?" Gerald thought about this. About the chaos of first contact, the terror of facing temporal collapse, the years of adjustment to galactic civilization, about Relix's nervous breakdown and Trevor's terrible business ideas and the harmonious forgiveness shrub that wouldn't stop singing. "It's been hard," he said finally, "confusing, overwhelming sometimes, but I think we're better for it. We're not alone anymore. We know the universe is bigger and stranger and more interesting than we imagined. We've made friends. We've learned things. We've contributed something meaningful. Is it what we expected? No. But is it good? Yes. I think so. And you? Personally? I'm still eating shepherd's pie at 7 p.m. every Tuesday. I've got Dorothy. I've got Trevor being ridiculous next door. I've got aliens occasionally stopping by to ask questions about human behavior. My life is weird now, but it's good weird. The kind of weird that makes existence worth experiencing." The Precursor seemed satisfied. "Good, because we're not intervening again. What happens next is up to all of you, humans and the rest of the consortium. We've set the stage, we've provided the tools, but the story that unfolds is yours to write. No more calculated probability futures. We're done calculating. We're just going to watch and see what happens. You've taught us something valuable. Sometimes the best outcomes emerge from not knowing what's going to happen, from trying things that probably won't work, from being stupid enough to be brave. Gerald raised his cup of tea in a gesture that could have been a toast or a salute. To stupidity and bravery, then. To stubborn survival, despite impossible odds. They drank. Or rather, Gerald drank, and the precursor manifested the concept of drinking, which was close enough. Before Gerald left, the precursor added one final thing. We left warnings about humanity in the protocols. All those cryptic messages about dinner times, and impossibility, and spite-based problem-solving. Would you like to know why we knew those things? How we encountered humans 50,000 years ago when you barely had language? I assumed you time-traveled or something. We did, but not to your past, to your future. We went forward, saw what humanity would become, and traveled back to ensure it happened. We saw your species spread across the galaxy. Saw you facing challenges that would break most civilizations. Saw you solve them through methods that made no logical sense, but worked anyway. We saw Earth become not the most powerful member of the consortium or the most advanced, but possibly the most important, because you reminded everyone else how to be stubborn, how to try impossible things, how to protect what matters even when cosmic forces suggest you shouldn't bother. What else did you see? That would be telling. And we've learned that humans don't want the answers given to them. You want to figure things out yourselves. So, we'll just say this. The galaxy's future is interesting. Very interesting. And humanity is right in the middle of it, causing chaos and solving problems and insisting on regular meal breaks, exactly as you should be. Gerald returned to Earth, told Dorothy what the precursor had said. She processed this information while watering her petunias. The harmonious forgiveness. Shrub sang accompaniment, slightly off-key. So we're important because we're stubborn and we eat dinner. Essentially. That's either the most meaningful thing I've ever heard or complete nonsense. Probably both. Dorothy smiled, kissed her husband on the cheek, reminded him that it was nearly 7 p.m. and the shepherd's pie wouldn't cook itself. Gerald went inside, started preparing dinner. Thought about probability and impossibility and the strange path that had led from a single interrupted meal to humanity having a place among the stars. The phone rang. Gerald looked at it, looked at the clock showing 6:47 p.m., looked back at the phone. He let it ring. Whoever it was could call back later. Dinner was in 13 minutes. And some things, no matter how important, no matter how urgent, no matter if the precursors themselves were calling with news that would reshape reality, some things could wait. Besides, it was probably just someone asking about his car's extended warranty. The universe continued in its complex dance of entropy and existence. 17,000 species went about their business. The temporal janitor maintained causality without fanfare. The precursors watched from their pocket dimension, with something that might have been pride or might have been amusement. And Gerald Pemberton Willis sat down at 7 p.m. sharp to eat his shepherd's pie in peace, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of human life, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new absurdities. But tonight, there was just dinner. And that was exactly how it should be.